In 2009, in the heart of glamorous Los Angeles, where bright lights concealed dark secrets, a horrifying murder took place. Singaporean-born actress Felicia Tang, who had a brief appearance in Fast and Furious, was found dead in her private mansion. The room reeked of blood, and her body bore over 320 wounds, including knife cuts, burns, and even human bite marks. Who was the killer? Why did this beautiful woman have to meet such a brutal end? Join Crime Documentary Files as we explore this case today. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit subscribe and like to help our channel reach 100,000 subscribers. Thank you for your support. At 4 a.m. on September 17, 2009, the quiet atmosphere of Los Angeles was shattered by an emergency call ringing through the Monrovia City Emergency Center. On the other end of the line, a man named Brian Lee Randone, his voice trembling and mixed with choking sobs, desperately screamed, "Help me! My girlfriend was attacked out there. She's covered in blood. She's dying." The panic in his voice made the dispatcher immediately realize this was no ordinary incident. Without hesitation, the dispatcher quickly verified the address and mobilized an emergency medical team along with a rescue helicopter to depart swiftly. Through the silent night, the helicopter's rotors whirred, tearing through the pitch-black sky, reflecting flashing blue and red lights onto the ground below. Inside the cabin, the medical personnel all wore tense and confused expressions. According to the information they received, the destination was a famous upscale mansion complex in Los Angeles, where every house had private security, modern security systems, and 24-hour police patrols. A place that was almost absolutely safe. Yet such a bloody attack had occurred? Out of caution, and to ensure everyone's safety, the medical personnel decided to immediately contact the local police station to report the situation. Within moments, police forces along with the medical team had arrived at the reported house. When the first responders stepped into the luxurious mansion, a thick, pungent smell of blood hit them straight in the face, causing them to furrow their brows and feel uneasy about what they were about to witness. Brian, the man who called for emergency help, with a face drenched in tears and an utterly panicked expression, hurriedly led the group deep inside the house, heading straight to the master bedroom. The scene that appeared before them truly made even those who had witnessed many crime scenes shudder. They could only see a woman with a frail, emaciated figure, completely naked, lying motionless on a sofa. Her entire body was covered with horrific wounds, so densely packed they were difficult to count, of varying sizes. Not only that, but on the white bedsheets, on the walls, and even on the polished wooden floor, everywhere was covered with dried, dark red bloodstains that were indescribably haunting. The entire room had become an unimaginable, chaotic battlefield, with items scattered about as if the place had just endured a fierce struggle. Seeing this, medical personnel immediately surrounded her and began emergency treatment, while police took Brian aside to ask about what had happened. Brian tearfully recounted that afternoon he had gone to play cricket with friends, got too into the game and strained a muscle, came home, took painkillers, and prepared to sleep. Before sleeping, his girlfriend Felicia said she was preparing to go out for a nighttime jog to exercise. He didn't think much of it, gave her a few words of advice, then went to sleep. In his sleep, he was awakened by violent noises, only to see his girlfriend running home covered in blood, saying she had been attacked. He quickly helped his girlfriend onto the sofa, trying to treat her wounds while calling emergency services. Seeing the scene before them, the medical team didn't hesitate for a second, immediately surrounding the victim and urgently performing emergency procedures with the slim hope of saving her life. Meanwhile, the police officers present at the scene gently took Brian aside to another corner of the room to collect information and inquire about the details of the entire sequence of events from beginning to end. Brian, his voice breaking with emotion and his face still wet with tears, sobbed out his story. He said that afternoon he had had a pleasant gathering with a group of close friends to play cricket together. However, because he was too immersed and enthusiastic in the match, unable to control the intensity of his movements, he unfortunately suffered a rather serious muscle strain. After returning home exhausted and aching, he took a dose of painkillers to ease the pain, then prepared to go to bed to rest. Before he drifted off to sleep, his girlfriend, Felicia, had informed him that she was planning to go out for an evening jog to exercise. At that time, Brian had no doubts or concerns about this. He just reminded his girlfriend with a few words about safety as usual, then went to sleep with peace of mind. However, while deep in sleep, Brian was suddenly awakened by a violent and unusual noise. He groggily opened his eyes and just managed to see Felicia staggering into the house in a horrific state, her entire body drenched in blood from head to toe. She ran in crying out that she had just been brutally attacked by someone outside. In a state of utter panic and confusion, Brian had rushed over to catch her and carefully helped her onto the sofa to lie down. He tried to use whatever he could find in the house to provide first aid for the wounds on his girlfriend's body, while with one trembling hand holding his phone to call emergency services for help. However, despite all the dedicated and tireless efforts of the doctors and medical staff, Felicia still could not cross the fragile boundary between life and death. In the end, she passed away in everyone's helplessness, dying in such an unfortunate and tragic way, leaving behind indelible pain for her loved ones. At such a young age, only 31 years old, Felicia had to close her life with such a heartbreaking end. Although in the entertainment industry she was not an A-list star or a name constantly mentioned in major newspapers, it cannot be denied that she had left memorable marks in some of the films she participated in. Moreover, she had appeared multiple times on Playboy television programs, a well-known entertainment platform, and through this, she had gradually built a certain reputation for herself, a unique place in the entertainment industry. But now, a person with such dreams, ambitions, and a career had to die right in her own home in an extremely tragic, brutal, and painful manner. This truly made anyone who learned of the incident feel horrified and could hardly imagine it. One couldn't help but ask the haunting question. In the final moments of her life, while still gasping at the border between life and death, what terrible torture did Felicia have to endure? What physical and mental pain did she suffer? With their experience and sharp observation skills, the police quickly discovered noteworthy suspicious points during their thorough investigation of the scene. According to Brian's testimony, if Felicia had truly been attacked outside the house and then in a state of panic and desperation had run home to seek help, then areas such as the front door, hallway stairs, and walkways inside the house, all the places the victim would have had to pass through to enter the bedroom, would certainly have left trails of blood along the way. However, what was strange and suspicious was that when investigators conducted a meticulous examination of the entire scene, they discovered that outside the bedroom, where most of the blood and signs of chaos were concentrated, all other places in the mansion were in an unusually clean condition, with no traces of blood whatsoever. Everything in the remaining areas was neat and tidy as if nothing had ever happened. Not stopping there, police also collected and carefully reviewed all the recordings from the 24-hour surveillance camera system installed densely around the house. However, after many hours of meticulously checking each frame, they did not discover any unusual, suspicious, or questionable images during the time period around the incident. Even more surprisingly, when investigators checked the recordings from before the incident occurred, they also completely failed to capture any images showing Felicia stepping out of the house even once. Furthermore, when the official forensic examination results were announced, they made the doubts about Brian's story even clearer. The report showed that Felicia's body had over 300 wounds of varying degrees of severity. If Felicia had truly been attacked outside as Brian claimed, then according to natural human reaction and survival instinct, any normal person, when stabbed or attacked with a weapon with just 1 or 2 knife strikes, would immediately react by fleeing the scene, or at least would cry out for help. So how could one explain Felicia allowing the perpetrator to inflict over 300 wounds all over her body before running home? This was clearly unreasonable. Right at this moment, while investigators were focused on analyzing the contradictions in Brian's testimony, a police officer was suddenly drawn to a painting hanging on the bedroom wall. It was a painting depicting an angel, but not an angel image in the conventional sense that people usually see. This painting carried an indescribable strangeness, a beauty mixed with darkness, and especially the strokes, colors, and expression of the angel all alluded to violence and suffering. The painting created a feeling of unease and eeriness for anyone who looked at it. The police officer decided to observe more carefully. When looking closely at each detail, he suddenly discovered that hidden within this painting was also a special symbol. After taking photos and conducting recognition searches through the database, the results showed this was the distinctive symbol of the Dark Angels Club, a club for people with BDSM interests in Los Angeles. This important discovery, like a crucial puzzle piece, made the entire investigation team realize that this case might be much more complex than initially imagined. With this new information, the police immediately turned to Brian and asked him directly whether he had any connection to the Dark Angels Club. What no one expected happened. Brian's reaction changed completely and suddenly. His attitude immediately shifted from the mournful, worried demeanor he had before to an extremely cautious, cold, and defensive one. Brian adamantly refused to answer any questions related to this topic, no matter how investigators tried to approach it in different ways. Finally, he declared he wanted to see his lawyer immediately and didn't say another word. This sudden change in attitude only increased police suspicions about Brian's real role in Felicia's tragic death. To shed light on the truth behind this mysterious case and find the real motive behind Felicia's death, the police decided to delve into the victim's past. They began to learn details about Felicia's upbringing, life, and relationships, hoping to restore the origin, context, and events leading to this tragic case. According to records and family testimony, Felicia was born in 1977 in Singapore. She grew up in a strictly Catholic and conservative family, where moral values, religious faith, and discipline were paramount. From a very young age, Felicia was carefully cared for by her parents and received a good education from both family and school, taught according to strict standards of morality and behavior. In particular, to create a pure, simple learning environment away from bad influences from outside society, Felicia's parents were very careful in choosing a school for their daughter. They not only sent her to an all-girls school, but when she got a bit older, around her teenage years, they made the decision to send her even further away. Felicia was sent to Perth, Australia, to study at a prestigious Catholic school for 2 years. However, Felicia's life took a major turn when she was only 13 years old. Due to work requirements for her father, Felicia's entire family had to emigrate and begin a new chapter of life in Los Angeles, USA. This was a vibrant city, famous for its entertainment industry, and also a place with a completely different culture from what Felicia had known. The free, open, and liberal culture of Los Angeles was completely opposite to Felicia's previous upbringing environment. If in Singapore and Australia, Felicia was carefully protected in a closed environment with clear rules and safe boundaries, then in Los Angeles, she was suddenly placed in a completely new open world. New things, different concepts about personal freedom, fashion, music, gender relations, and modern lifestyles continuously came at her and strongly clashed with the traditional perceptions she had been shaped by throughout her childhood. This sudden cultural transition was not simply a geographical change, but silently, day by day, profoundly affected her personality, way of thinking, and value system. After entering university, Felicia had noticeable changes in appearance and demeanor. She became increasingly charming and attractive naturally, with a tall, slender figure and increasingly sharp facial features. Whenever she walked on the vast campus grounds, whether simply going to class or to the library, Felicia always became the focal point, attracting admiring glances from all directions. She became one of the prominent faces, the center of attention of many students at school. However, beneath that radiant and attractive exterior, Felicia still carried deep influences from her past. Strongly affected by traditional Eastern family education, Felicia still had a characteristic shyness. Faced with advances, compliments, or approach attempts from male friends, she always appeared confused, unconfident, and really didn't know how to respond naturally. One ordinary day after afternoon classes, as Felicia was leisurely walking on the familiar path to her dormitory, she was unexpectedly approached by an energetic-looking black male student who struck up a conversation in a friendly manner. This young man introduced himself as Harper, saying he was from Maryland. The two, though in the same class year and university students of the same year, were studying different majors, so had never had the opportunity to meet or talk before. Harper approached Felicia with an extremely sincere, open, and friendly attitude. He shared that he had always had a special interest and passion for Chinese culture. He expressed his desire to learn Mandarin Chinese in order to understand this culture more deeply, and very much hoped that Felicia, with her Asian background and apparent knowledge of Eastern culture, could spare some time to help him on this language-learning journey. Felicia at first felt quite confused and didn't know how to react to this unexpected request. She hesitated, weighing between politely declining and accepting to help a new friend. However, when observing more carefully, she noticed Harper seemed to be a cheerful, optimistic young man with a sincere smile and eyes that held nothing suspicious. After a period of hesitation and thought, finally with goodwill and a desire to help others, Felicia nodded and agreed to this request. From that moment, the relationship between the two began to develop, and they frequently met at various locations on campus, sometimes in study rooms, sometimes on the vast athletic fields, or at the pavilion by the campus lake. Under the positive influence from their frequent meetings and Harper's encouragement, Felicia gradually began to have significant changes in terms of personality. She was no longer shy and timid as before, but became cheerful, open, and much more confident. However, this innocent and beautiful initial friendship didn't last long, but gradually had unpredictable changes. The relationship between the two began to move in a different direction, beyond the boundaries of simple friendship. On a fateful evening, Harper had prepared a special confession. He used halting, not yet fluent but full of sincerity, Mandarin Chinese to read a sweet love poem that he had tried hard to memorize to give to Felicia. Felicia at that time felt embarrassed by feelings being expressed so publicly. She hesitated for a short time, but in the end, perhaps swept up by youthful emotions, or simply by the sincerity in Harper's eyes, Felicia silently nodded in agreement to his confession. From then on, the two officially began a romantic relationship. But that beautiful dream of love didn't last long. Just after a short time dating, Harper gradually revealed his true face. This young man, behind his bright exterior, was actually a depraved person with all kinds of social vices. He was heavily addicted to illegal substance, smoked continuously, was addicted to alcohol, and even frequently fought with others. It could be said that Harper gathered almost every type of vice and negative behavior a person could have. After one intimate encounter between the two, Harper held Felicia in his arms and made a shocking and disgusting suggestion. "I'm a bit short on money lately. You're so beautiful. Why don't you put it to use and work in the red light district to make money? When I have enough money, you'll also have good days, enjoying a life of luxury, right?" Hearing these words from the mouth of the person she loved and trusted, Felicia felt like being struck by lightning. She couldn't believe her ears, couldn't imagine that the boyfriend she had given her feelings to was actually such a despicable, lowly person who wanted to push his girlfriend onto the path of degradation for profit. However, under the other party's fierce threats and persuasion, she finally gave in. Thus, in just a short period of less than 2 years, the innocent, pure, and hopeful girl of the past had completely disappeared. Felicia, who had once been carefully protected in the shell of family and religion, had now fallen into an inescapable quagmire. Smoking, drinking, and especially using prohibited substances were no longer strange or frightening things, but had become an indispensable part of her daily life. These bad habits were like invisible chains that step by step bound her to a degraded lifestyle. Later, at a lavish and noisy party, Felicia happened to meet a fairly well-known adult film director in the adult entertainment industry. This man, with a professional eye accustomed to casting actors, immediately spotted Felicia's attractive appearance and sensual figure. He approached her with an enticing offer to work for him, participate in filming adult content to earn large amounts of money quickly, something a normal job could hardly provide. At this point, Felicia had completely drifted along with life, no longer having any clear direction or goals for the future. Moreover, she was desperately looking for a way to escape Harper's suffocating control and violence. Thinking this might be an opportunity for financial independence and escape from Harper, Felicia agreed to the offer and entered the adult film industry, a decision marking an even deeper fall in her life. However, Having entered a lavish lifestyle of spending money like water to satisfy increasingly high material needs, Felicia realized that income from filming alone was still not enough. Therefore, she did not give up her old profession in the red light district, but continued to maintain both in parallel. She participated in adult film shoots during the day while working in prostitution at night, living a dual, degraded life. During this dark period, there were also times when Felicia awakened and wanted to change. She once had a marriage with a kind man. This was an opportunity for her to build a warm family and live a proper life. But the habit of lavish living had sunk so deeply into her bones that she couldn't adapt to normal family life. Everything made her feel bored and suffocated. Very quickly, she began to secretly return to her old profession. Finally, as an inevitable outcome, the truth was exposed, and they quickly divorced. After the upheavals in her life, Felicia began to have more practical thoughts about her future. She deeply realized an undeniable truth. Her youth was passing day by day, and her figure, though still attractive, no longer had the vibrant vitality of her 20s. Felicia understood that with her current profession and lifestyle, she couldn't rely on her looks forever. Therefore, a fierce desire arose in her heart to find a wealthy, stable man who could become her long-term patron, ensuring a comfortable life for her remaining years. With a clear goal in mind, Felicia began appearing at upscale, elegant balls, places reserved for high society, where successful businessmen, wealthy professionals, and single men with large fortunes congregated. She carefully applied makeup, wore expensive dresses, practiced elegant behavior to fit in with this class, all hoping that here she could meet her destiny. And fate didn't make Felicia wait too long. Just after a short time actively participating in high-end social events, she met a man who seemed perfect in every way, at least from what the surface showed. This man was named Brian Lee Randone, and at that time he was 45 years old. Although he was bald, looking at the features on his face, one could see that in his youth he had been quite handsome and attractive. Brian was not an ordinary person. He graduated from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago with a bachelor's degree, then continued advanced study at the prestigious Southwestern Theological Seminary in Texas, where he earned a master's degree in theology. At the time of meeting Felicia, Brian had built an extremely successful career in the field of missionary work and religion. He was known as a respected missionary with credibility in the community, regularly preaching and admired by many people. What was special was that despite being middle-aged and having everything, Brian was still single and had never married. He lived alone in a large, luxurious mansion in a famous, wealthy neighborhood of Los Angeles. Felicia and Brian met at a lavish ball. Among the crowd, the two somehow found each other. Some say they fell in love at first sight. Brian was attracted by Felicia's seductive beauty and youthful appearance, while Felicia saw in Brian a mature, stable, educated, and especially wealthy man. They talked all evening. Just after one night of meeting, the very next day, Brian invited Felicia to move in with him in his luxurious mansion, and she agreed without hesitation. Felicia at this time was overflowing with happiness. She felt that finally, after so many years of hardship, fate had smiled on her. She believed she had found solid support for the rest of her life. A wealthy, educated, moral man, and most importantly, someone who seemed to truly care about her. However, Felicia, in that intoxicated happiness, could never have suspected that the luxurious mansion was actually a hell. At first, Brian was the model of an ideal man, thoughtful, polite, and full of romance. He often held Felicia's hand, appearing at lavish parties, attending elegant balls of high society with her, traveling everywhere, enjoying meals at famous restaurants, and sparing no expense buying her expensive gifts. In Felicia's eyes, it was a sweet and perfect love like a fairy tale. However, that gentleness was only the perfect cover for a nightmare. Not long after, the true face of this man gradually revealed itself. Outwardly, Brian was an exemplary pastor, but behind that sanctimonious mask, he was actually a sick pervert, carrying within him a pathological obsession with the pleasure from control and destruction. Brian's real purpose in approaching Felicia was not love, but the desire to dominate. He was mesmerized by her nearly perfect body, and that very perfection awakened in him the desire to destroy. Whenever the two were intimate, Brian became a beast obsessed with brutal pleasure. After each time like that, Felicia's entire body would be covered with bruises. And then, to soothe Felicia, Brian would write her large-value checks, and like that, a cycle of violence, remorse, bribery kept repeating endlessly. Felicia also many times felt regret and wanted to escape from this hell. But each time the intention to leave flickered in her heart, Brian knew how to keep her with the most powerful weapon: money. He would write checks with huge amounts, buy her luxurious items, promise a bright and wealthy future. And Felicia, with a past full of deprivation and a longing to live in abundance, had many times been tempted by that money. But after 3 months, when the wounds on Felicia's body not only didn't decrease but increasingly accumulated and piled up, Felicia finally awakened to a cruel truth. If she didn't leave this place, if she didn't end this relationship as soon as possible, then one day not far off, she would certainly die at Brian's hands. When Brian realized that his prey had begun to have intentions of escaping, when he sensed the change in Felicia's attitude, Brian didn't hesitate to use more extreme measures. Brian imprisoned Felicia, not allowing her to go outside, not allowing her to contact anyone, completely isolating her from the outside world. And in the condition of being imprisoned like a prisoner, Brian continued, even intensified his humiliating, violent acts at will and more brutally, without any restraint. Felicia became a toy completely under the control of a pervert. Until one fateful day when Brian realized that his favorite toy was gradually breaking down, he knew she couldn't endure much longer. And in his sick mind, Brian made a final decision. He would enjoy Felicia one last time in the most frenzied and extreme way before this toy completely shattered. With that malicious intention, Brian made Felicia consume a special stimulant substance, something he brought back from the Dark Angels Club. Very quickly, within just a few minutes, under the strong and violent effects of this dangerous substance, Felicia had become uncontrollably excited, completely losing consciousness of herself and of pain. Although everywhere on her body were bleeding wounds, Felicia still appeared extremely proactive, as if she was completely immersed in pleasure rather than pain. Felicia's strange and horrifying behavior made Brian feel as if his life had reached the peak of satisfaction. He experienced a feeling of conquest. In his deranged mind, he thought this was his masterpiece, the highest achievement in his sick games. However, the human body has limits, and what Brian had done had far exceeded those limits. When the substance's effects gradually wore off, Felicia's body could no longer endure. She passed away right in that bedroom in the luxurious mansion. Only at this point, when seeing Felicia lying still, no longer breathing, did Brian truly panic and become frightened. His hand trembled as he picked up the phone and called emergency services. His voice hurried and panicked. Because his mind was no longer functioning normally, dominated by fear and self-preservation instinct, Brian could only fabricate a flawed story about Felicia being attacked outside and then running home, trying to play the role of a worried boyfriend, trying to deceive the police. But unfortunately, the police were not as easy to fool as Brian thought. They quickly recognized serious contradictions in Brian's testimony. Faced with clear physical evidence at the scene, Brian could no longer deny or make excuses. When investigators continued to ask about information related to the Dark Angels Club, Brian refused to answer, shame showing in his eyes. This made the police even more certain that this man was definitely not telling the truth. He was most likely the perpetrator of the case. Because the evidence collected was sufficient and clear, the case quickly entered the trial phase, opening a tense confrontation between justice and power. The entire city of Los Angeles seemed to hold its breath watching, because defendant Brian Lee Randone was not only a pastor with status, but also someone who had been associated with the local community for many years, with wide connections and deep influence in high society. Immediately after being prosecuted, Brian spent money lavishly, hiring the top law firm in Los Angeles to defend him. This was a group specializing in serving the wealthy class, having helped countless billionaires and powerful people escape prison. They were skilled at exploiting legal loopholes, taking advantage of every small detail in the investigation process, and turning technical errors into legal shields for their clients. When the trial opened, the defense quickly took the initiative. They directly attacked the police's initial investigation process, claiming the crime scene was not properly preserved according to regulations. Some blood samples taken from the victim's house were not recorded with accurate times and could have been affected during preservation. Their purpose was very clear: to weaken the credibility of the evidence and make the jury doubt the objectivity of the investigation. Faced with those sharp arguments, the prosecution maintained its position firmly. They presented to the court the autopsy report, along with a series of horrifying photographic evidence. All over Felicia's body were over 320 wounds of various sizes, including knife wounds, burns, bite marks, and countless bruises. Professional analysis showed that the wounds appeared at different times. Some had begun to heal on their own, proving the victim had endured prolonged and repeated violence over a long period before death. In addition to the physical evidence presented, the investigating police also testified directly in court, providing additional important details reinforcing suspicions against Brian Lee Randone. According to investigation results, they determined that Brian was a veteran member of the Dark Angels Club. Brian was not just an ordinary member, but was also said to be very passionate about these extreme activities. When comparing with the crime scene and Felicia's body condition, police noticed the types of injuries: knife wounds, burns, bites, and bruising. Additionally, there was no trace of a third party entering or leaving the room at the time of the murder, giving police sufficient basis to believe Brian was the sole perpetrator. However, Brian's defense legal team did not agree with this. They quickly counterattacked, arguing that Brian's past participation in the Dark Angels Club could not be considered grounds for convicting him of murder. Moreover, the absence of a third party entering or leaving the room did not mean this was intentional murder, but could be a tragic accident. They presented a completely different hypothesis, claiming that the real cause of Felicia's death was overdose of illegal antidepressant medication. According to the defense, this type of banned substances could suppress the respiratory system, causing users to faint, convulse, and lose control of their body. When overdosed, the victim could stop breathing without being able to call for help. To strengthen the argument, the defense also invited a close friend of Felicia to testify. This person testified that Felicia used to habitually use medication in large doses, even potentially finishing an entire bottle. The lawyers exploited this detail to paint the picture of a fallen and addicted woman, claiming she had lost the ability to control herself. Facing a formidable, experienced legal team paid exorbitant salaries, the prosecution had to bear tremendous pressure. They knew they were facing not just a wealthy defendant, but an entire system of power and money trying to distort the truth. But despite the heavy pressure, the prosecutors showed no fear or backing down. First, the prosecution presented the official autopsy report, clearly stating Felicia's actual cause of death was asphyxiation. This was absolutely not death from banned substances overdose, as the defense had tried to convince the jury. Second, the dried blood on her face, the obvious and painful bruises around her eyes and mouth, all bore clear marks of direct violence. These were injuries caused deliberately and violently by human hands, not the result of an accident or self-inflicted injury. The characteristics of these wounds were completely inconsistent, even completely contradicted, the typical death characteristics from banned substances addiction or drug overdose. Although the prosecution's rebuttal arguments were extremely tightly constructed, all those efforts seemed insufficient to change the outcome. Because this trial, from the very first days of being convened, carried within it deep injustices, systematic biases that made justice almost impossible to be served. The biggest problem lay in the composition of the jury. The majority of jury members selected all came from the very wealthy neighborhood where Brian had lived and been active for many years. This was not a random coincidence, but could be the result of Brian's skilled legal team's influence during the jury selection process. These people either had direct business relationships with Brian or in the past had received favors, help, or investments from him. Some were even members of the same social groups, the same elite clubs, or had attended Brian's missionary services. With such intertwined connections, how could one expect a fair and objective verdict? Moreover, Brian's sophisticated legal team used a dirty but extremely effective tactic. Instead of focusing on proving their client innocent, they continuously attacked the victim's personal character. They dug up and publicly exposed Felicia's entire dark past before the jury and public. They described her as a promiscuous woman, a former adult film actress, someone continuously immersed in banned substances and a depraved lifestyle. They implied that with such a lifestyle, her death was the natural consequence of her own wrong choices, not Brian's fault. This victim-blaming tactic, though extremely unethical and unrelated to who caused Felicia's death, was extremely effective in weakening her image and the sympathy for her in the jury members' hearts. Finally, after many tense days of trial, after countless back-and-forth arguments, the judge read the final verdict based on the jury's conclusion declaring, "Brian Lee Randone, the murder charge does not stand." Those words rang out in the courtroom like lightning striking the hearts of those yearning for justice. Hearing that verdict, the chief prosecutor, who had fought with all his might throughout the trial, couldn't hide the deep helplessness and disappointment on his face. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with exhaustion and sadness. The police officers in charge of this case felt even more frustrated and helpless, only able to shake their heads and sigh painfully. Outside the courthouse, Felicia's family collapsed upon hearing the verdict. This trial, in the end, proved a bitter truth. In a society where money and power can buy almost everything, justice can still be twisted, can still be bought, and can lose to power. And that is today's case. What are your thoughts on Felicia's life? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.